Samantha Jo, I am so thrilled to welcome you today to the Divine Union podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for this invitation. I feel so honored. I feel so privileged. It feels so juicy. And I'm excited to dive in with you, babe.
I cannot wait to dive in with you. And we're just going to go head. I'm going to say actually yoni in. Yeah, that feels aligned for your work. We're just going
Yes,
to go yoni in, full body in here, heart in.
I love it. I love it.
Tell us, Samantha, because you've got such an amazing breadth of work. And with your program, the pleasure codes and now the temple, I want to know, how did you get into this work of pleasure? Working with the body, the nervous system. What was your journey into that space?
Thank you so much for that ask. Yeah, I mean, I guess when I think about the whole journey, it's hard to like just take little pieces out because it's so everything compounds, right? So I've created this method called the pleasure codes, and, it might be like my method or whatever, but it's really not my codes. These are like the inherent feminine codes of thriving life that are just like longing to be integrated and unlocked within all of us. And how I came to the pleasure codes is like, a lifetime of energetics and magic. My grandmother started teaching me about sort of the realm of the unseen, and that your energy is creating your reality like so young, as a teenager, and like hitting my first sort of drama with friends. And I would tell her and she would slip me books like The Power of Constructive Thinking. She would be like, pray for them, there's a reason this is happening. This is teaching you something. Like this would be like where she would come from. So this is how I grew up. It's not totally typical. It's like we were going to channelings and song circles and all kinds of things as a kid. I was like pulling angel cards and tarot cards before I could read. So there's all of this. And then I found yoga as like maybe an 18-year-old, started practicing yoga, got really into yogic philosophy. And I was always really into spirituality and religion, but like theology and like life and death and the meaning of life, and why there's like so many differences to like all these kind of like religious, spokes on the wheel, but they're really all the same, but people aren't really getting it. Like I always kind of saw it. And the feminine was always like, I remember being in a church service with my mom when I was young, and I just knew something was missing. Like I was looking around and I was like, where is she? Like where is she? And the priest said something like, if you're not donating in the church every week, you're going to hell. And I know this is not a representation of the entire, Catholic thing, but it was the moment my mom and I looked at each other where like we walked out, we never went back. And I was like, I thought to myself, like, who gave this guy a mic? Like something's missing here. Like the sweetness and the love that this is about is like missing. And I always kind of like as I grew, I kind of like always sensed these little gaps almost, in some of the experiences that I had. And so that leads me to like being a yoga practitioner for many years. Was in a really abusive relationship, like deep, deep suffering, identity crisis, like so much going on. And then I gave birth to my daughter, and that was an incredible transformation. It really changed my life. It helped me step away from the life I had been living and into a new one, and kind of open myself back up to kind of the realm of the infinite that I had been, sort of like suffering and disconnection from. And I started teaching yoga during that time when my daughter was young, and started leading women's circles and retreats, and kind of getting more into leadership, bringing this kind of expansive knowledge. And I was really connected to very elevated philosophy, like, and so were all the people that I was in relationship with and community with. We're all like yogis, we're studying the Bhagavad Gita. It's like, yet we kept getting hung up on the same shit. It's like, how, if we know this elevated philosophy that, we're temporarily in this body, but we're like an eternal soul, and the nature of the soul is blissful and fully conscious and totally wise, and like we're here to live from this place, and yet we're like being an asshole, or we're like running into the same relationship problems, or like my bank account is empty. Like, what is going on? Where is the disconnect between
Mhm.
knowing this stuff intellectually, but actually embodying it in the 3D, in the physical? And so this was a deep churning that I was in. And at this time, I met my now husband, my hunky, beautiful,
You're
sexy man.
hunky.
hunky, beautiful,
Yes,
sexy man.
I can attest.
Yeah, yeah, he's a hunky man. And when I met him, he was like a bald-headed monk, like a bald-headed celibate monk, of course, right? The yogi, like, you know, theologian at heart meets like the bald monk, and I'm like, this is my guy, you know? So we end up like getting engaged in India, going back 3 months later, getting married. Like within 6 months, we were married. It was nuts. And then, like you would probably anticipate, we were in for a rude awakening because that was very fast. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? That was real fast. And it's like, okay, here we are
It's
raising
like,
my,
oh, hey, now I'm actually meeting you 6 months later.
oh,
Yes, this is
okay.
weird.
And we're married now. Like, wow. Okay, let's see where this goes. So the first couple years were hard. They were really hard, and I continued this, you know, and had been starting to get into coaching, consulting work at that point because clients were inviting me, you know, like my yoga people would just be like, hey, can we have like a session? I like became a Reiki practitioner just to feel like I had like something to give in a session because I still wasn't quite like, yeah, I could do this. And I noticed that same pattern. It's like, how do we know these things up here and they're not, it's not playing out in alignment in the 3D? And so this continued to be a beckoning to me, this curiosity that I had. And then, you know, shit really kind of started to hit the fan in my marriage. It started to get really tough, you know, and our unresolved issues were like all at the forefront. And we were more like roommates than lovers. It was like real dull, you know, like so disconnected. And it was around that time that I started my somatic experiencing training. I had been looking like it's the nervous system. Like, what is it? What is that missing? What's the gap? You know? Oh, it's the nervous system. Like these are my hangups, right? So I started studying. I went into the somatic experiencing professional training, and it was like so incredible. And I'm like such a nerdy, like I love neuroscience, you know? So it was like so fun. I was like everyone in the room in the professional training is like therapists and LCSWs and psychologists, and like there's like me and my homie who's like a yoga teacher, you know, we're like the only like woo-woo people in the room. And that was really, it was eye-opening, it was life-changing. However, the funny thing about it was that it was transforming the way that I saw people and myself and how I worked with people, but it was not transforming my marriage because you can't see what you can't see, and you don't know what you don't know. And so at the time, I was really operating in this chronic flight pattern in my marriage, but I blamed everything on my husband. You know, I thought the reason why we didn't have an extraordinary partnership was it had to be him because I'm so like advanced.
Couldn't
Like
be me.
I'm so hot. I'm so elevated, right? Like this was my egoic thinking, and it was the way that my nervous system was protecting me from seeing what was really going on. And what was
Wow.
really going on, what I later realized and learned was that, you know, my nervous system was just reacting like that this was a threat the same way that my last relationship had been. And so my mind was in this constant criticism and judgment of my partner because your story follows your state. And so the state of my body was in a chronic survival response, but I didn't know that at the time. And it just creates stories to match. Why do I feel this way inside? And so a lot of times what we do is we just listen to the stories in our mind and we believe that that's the real reality. But the stories in our mind are really just a reflection of what's going on in the system, right? And
Also,
so
what this is bringing up, just for a moment, of what you're sharing, Samantha, is like this expands beyond relationship, beyond your story. It's like anything that anyone
everything.
feels, career, other aspects of relating,
Yes.
the power of the body.
Yes. And that's why the work that I do can't be put into a niche because I work with the root that is what waters every single area of your body, right? Every single area of the body of your life. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Mhm.
the relationship that you have with yourself on like a mind, body, soul level is the foundation of the relationship you have with everything else. And so when you get that right, then it's like a trickle, you know, it's like a ripple into everything else. And so for me, I didn't realize that was what was going on. I just thought I had picked the wrong partner. And I decided that I wanted to have an extraordinary relationship. And so I thought what I needed to do was get rid of him. It's so terrible when I say it that way. That's what I was going through. That was really what my mind was telling me. It's like, oh, I chose wrong. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. And sometimes that's the truth, but sometimes it's not.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's the way that we're keeping one foot out the door because there's a trauma
Yeah.
response going on. And so we had a really, really challenging separation, and he moved out. And this really interesting thing happened because instead of grieving, I was beckoned in by pleasure. It's like I like joke around that the message I was getting was to go fuck yourself, like literally.
Wow.
You know, it was like coming in, it was like a divine, you know, you have like a divine calling. It's so weird. And it's like everywhere you go, you see it. It's like somebody's bringing something up, or somebody sends you a recommendation or a podcast or a book falls in your lap. Everything was about sexual liberation and pleasure. And here I was thinking,
Wow.
like, I was a pretty, like, I felt like I was a pretty sexually liberated woman, you know, like bisexual woman, been with all kinds of people, group experiences. Like, I know how to get off. I know what I like. I have no problem, like, saying what I want in the bedroom. So I thought, like, I'm a down ass bitch. Like, I know what's going on, right?
Right.
And then I had this calling. And so I dedicated myself in that time in the beginning of our separation to like a daily ritual, like a daily self-pleasure ritual that was like long and juicy, you know, like not just like a quick, like I'm gonna orgasm every day. It wasn't like that. It was like, I am going to savor myself every day and be with my body and explore the female anatomy of arousal and really like ride my experience to the edges of like what I can feel in terms of my pleasure. And it opened up so much that I had never experienced before. You know, a lot of women don't realize, a lot of people don't realize that the female anatomy, like the female arousal anatomy, the female anatomy has just as much erectile tissue as does the male anatomy. But it takes like 30 to 40 minutes for a lot of women, not everybody, to become fully aroused and engorged. And so we live in a culture that like really premature penetration is like the norm. It's what we see. It's what all the messaging is just like this is the point, right? This is what we get to. But most women aren't having pleasurable sex because they're not even fully aroused, right?
I
So
love this reminder for
yeah,
everyone.
it's so
And
important. Yeah.
and I also would love, and we can do this after, or if you have like a little story, because I love stories about pleasure that you've had connecting to your pleasure in this time. Because I'll
Yeah.
just say what for me, when I was practicing Tantra regularly 2 hours a day, and I love that you're speaking to this, and I want your insight on this, Samantha, is because it is a practice, because it's so easy to orgasm, to restrict the breath, to force the orgasm. But when it's a practice because it takes work to not force it. And I'll tell you, at that time of my life, like I've never felt so connected to source, to God, so powerful. And I would love, yeah, if you have any stories to really like, this is why it matters. This is how you feel when you
Yes, well,
do it.
I'm gonna that we're in it. I'm gonna take you to all of it. This is gonna loop all the way around to how the pleasure codes came to be. So in that time that I was really working with this, I became really interested in, you know, the unicorn of the cervical orgasm, which is like the deepest orgasm that a female body can experience. It's supposed to be like the most cosmic, you know, connected to the cosmos, like portal all the way open, like most insane out of this world pleasure. And I was like, I want that. You know, I didn't even know. I hadn't even known that that was a thing. I didn't even know that there were different types of orgasms and layers of orgasms like that. And so that became part of my practice. And over the course of the time that I was in this, eventually, you know, and there was a whole process when you're working with the cervix of like de-armoring. You know, it's like finding that pleasure often requires you to lean into discomfort. And that's a metaphor for life, right? And that's why in the pleasure codes I talk about bringing the pleasure into the pressure, right? Because when you're working with on a body level, we have a tendency to feel discomfort and back right away from it. Ooh, right? But what this beckons in when you're working with the armoring is to find the edge, you know, right where it's like, ooh, and then like be with it and breathe with it and soften with it and slowly, right? So I did this process for a while. And then eventually, as you would have it, I experienced the fucking cosmic cervical orgasm, and it was like the crown jewel, the hidden treasure, the pot of gold at the end of the freaking rainbow. And what surprised me was that not only was it absolutely an incredible experience, more sensation of pleasure than I had ever known before, on the other side of it, I released years of grief.
Mm.
Years, maybe generations, like so much grief. All the tears I wasn't crying about separating from my husband, all the tears I hadn't cried from the abusive fucking relationship that I was in for 5 years, all the tears that I hadn't cried for being a single mom, and all the things. It's like everything came. And on the other side of that, I have chills just thinking about it. My body is like in a cellular memory of this. On the other side of that, I started to see my husband completely in a different light. And I started to realize all of the ways that my body had been holding a shield against him. And all of the somatic work that I had been doing actually started to land because of the resource of my pleasure. I want to let that sink in for a minute. My pleasure opened new pathways for the somatic work that I had been doing to actually land in my system and translate in the 3D to being able to connect more deeply, open myself more fully, become more vulnerable and connected in my marriage. And it saved my marriage. And what we did was we came back together, we did a lot of repair, but I said, I really want to have sex. I want to have sex my way. I want to explore this arc, this slow curving arc of female arousal. And what happened was amazing is that my husband actually found what he had been wanting and not knowing all that time. He thought he just wanted more sex, but what he wanted was this gourmet shit. And now, because I unlocked it in myself, he was able to access that. So the feminine is the portal of pleasure. It's the source of pleasure. And so often, a masculine partner, and this has been my experience, and I've seen this with people that I've worked with and couples that I've worked with. It's like the thought is like, I just want more sex. But it's not about quantity, it's about quality. And the feminine sets the pace, right? So a lot of women feel unsatisfied in their sexual connection because they feel like it's not giving them what they want, but they're not actually speaking up for what they want or need. They don't even know what feels good. Okay? Right? So this is bringing us into the pleasure codes because what I realized was that the ultimate nervous system expander, I used to not be able to speak up about a lot of things. I had a lot of people pleasing, fawning stuff in my system. So something would bother me, and instead of being able to communicate, which is so important, I couldn't communicate because what would happen is I would feel it clenching up in my throat and I would stuff it back down. Right? As I started to liberate more pleasure and the experience of pleasure in my body, all of a sudden I was able to say hard things that I hadn't been able to say before.
Mhm.
I was able to communicate things that I hadn't been able to communicate before. And that was not only in the bedroom, but like everywhere in the relationship. And so my nervous system was expanding, my capacity was expanding as a result of this incredible experience with pleasure.
Wow. This is insane because what I'm hearing from you, it's through, well, first, it's this element of the more connected you were to yourself, the more connected you could be with your partner in sex. You could ask for what you want. You know what you want. And it's reminding everyone listening, this resonates so deeply for me. It's we have to be connected to our own pleasure, to our own bodies. And that's how we're even able to set the pace in sex. That's how we're even able to ask for what we want. And I love what you're saying, Samantha, because it's so true. It's often the masculine does desire that as well, to feel that pleasure, but they look to the feminine, who is, as you're saying, we're the pleasure, we're the going inwards. If we're not in our own bodies, how can they be in theirs? And they feel safe when they see us surrender in our own bodies without having to please. That's so powerful. And I also love what you're saying of just that nervous system creates the safety for you to express. And like that bridges for me with my work as well, with like the masculine and feminine, because the masculine energy is also you saying, let's try this. How will we play in this way? And then it lets you receive as well. Let's explore. We don't have to be perfect at sex. Let's play.
Yes, yes. And we brought so much playfulness in that time. That was like, it was just this big feminine wave of like playfulness and pleasure and slow and just like savoring and delight and just expanded so much for us in our union. And it actually, for a long time, like I feel like communication and sex, like they really have to go hand in hand when it comes to intimate partnerships, because for a long time we thought what we needed was communication. We thought we needed to improve our communication, which was also true. But we became so focused on what was missing there, we were avoiding the fact that there was there was a real lack of intimacy. And so when you bring communication, like the power of your work into and like intersect with the importance of just like having more sex, but having good sex, not quantity, but quality, right? And it
Yes.
requires communication, it requires courage, to be able to be in that conversation about how we want to do this and what we want to do, right? And that's why coming back to like knowing what it is that you like, knowing what feels good, and this is number one, the first pleasure code is doing more of what feels good. And so what I teach women is like a spectrum of pleasure. So a lot of people hear my work, pleasure codes, and they're like, oh my God, she just teaches people how to have great sex and orgasm. That's just part of what I do. It's a really juicy part. But I teach a whole spectrum of pleasure, from microdosing pleasure, which is just like literally slowing down, being in relationship to your environment, taking things in through your senses that help you to feel a sense of inside. And even like we could do this together right now, and anyone listening, just like slow down and look around wherever you are, as long as it's safe, you're not driving, but even if you are, you just notice something that you like to look at. And you just let your eyes land there a little bit longer so that you can not only see it through your eyes, but you can really take it into your body, like as if it was medicine coming in through your sense channel and dropping in, and just notice what happens in your body. Like for me, my stomach unclenches, my shoulders relax, my face relaxes. There's like an exhale. What do you feel?
I'm feeling my jaw loosen, and
Yeah.
my hands were gripping each other here over my desk, and they started to loosen. I'm looking at just a beautiful, the light pink. I have a light pink mouse and mouse pad, and just the color, I was letting that let me just soften. And your voice, receiving your voice.
It's powerful. That's quick, right? You can create a shift so quickly. And this is such a powerful way of taking responsibility for your state and your energy and taking your power back into your own hands. But the more it's like pleasure is like compounding interest. And so the more, we're wired to pay more attention to what doesn't feel good because it's how we survive. So we're wired to orient to potential threat. So looking for what feels good is a skill that we have to develop. It's like a muscle. And the more you commit to that, the microdosing practice or orienting, being in relationship to pleasure and beauty, the more you commit to it, it becomes easier and easier. But it's an opposite of the way most people live. So
That's
it's
such an interesting, yeah, that's such an interesting comment of using that as a lens, a reminder also to think about where's the attention going? Is it on the leg that's in pain, or is it on the leg that feels good?
right.
Or in sex, is it focusing on the pain, or can I focus on, without even a judgment, like what are the sensations I feel from this movement, or their hands gliding on my arms?
Right, that's right. And this is why, something that I teach often that I mentioned before is like bringing the pleasure into the pressure, because so the pleasure codes are kind of like a three-part framework, but they have infinite depth. So you can see them at surface value and you're just like, oh, okay, but then like there's a million things underneath the surface of those that you could apply to every fucking area of your life. So it's like doing more of what feels good, reclaiming the power of your desire, right? Knowing what you want. Because when you don't know what you want, it's like you don't even know where you're going, right? And desire is like this holy calling. So for me, it was like the turning point in my marriage was when I decided that I had a desire for something extraordinary. I didn't want a mediocre partnership. I didn't want to feel like I had a roommate. I wanted something extraordinary. And then we went through this
Yes.
big, huge turmoil and change, and there was a lot of pressure, like a pressure cooker. But I brought the pleasure into the pressure, and things transformed. And then the third pleasure code is normalizing extraordinary, which means getting yourself in relationships and spaces with other people who are living in alignment with this way of being, whether it's like having incredible relationships, making obscene money, running soul-driven, purpose-driven, mission-oriented businesses, like being so satisfied and juicy in their motherhood, like whatever it is for you, all of the above,
Yeah.
normalizing that through relationship, because that's how the nervous system calibrates feeling safe, having more,
Mhm.
having the thing that you want. And so, we are women that are aligned with, we want exponential growth. Like you and I are both, we live a life where we're
Mhm.
like, we want to stretch into the edges of our potential. We want to serve at the highest
Mhm.
level, right? Like we want to experience everything there is to experience. Well, a lot of the mainstream somatics teachers, they teach about safety. I
Mhm.
don't teach about safety. I teach about pleasure because the sensation of growth does not feel like safety. It feels like pressure. I'm not
Mm.
looking to feel safe. I'm looking to be able to source a sense of expansion inside that gives me enough capacity to move through whatever the next big, scary, hard, risky thing is
Ooh.
that life is bringing to me to grow me. If I was wanting to source safety all the time, I wouldn't be fucking growing.
Wow, this is such a wild, wild shift. I want to pause on that for a moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of like
Yeah.
sourcing into the pleasure to catapult the growth. Because right now you got me thinking, okay, safety, maybe then it's like closed. I got my armor on, I'm ready to go. But the pleasure is like, okay, how do I withstand? How do I alchemize this crunchy situation, this fear, and use pleasure to help me actually want to move through it, to be able to move through it? That is fascinating. And I also think it's so fascinating, just for a moment, to go back to the second code where you talk about using pleasure to incite desire, right? To fuel the desire, because this is something that I feel is so common. And I'm curious if you see it in your work. I see it in mine. It's this dynamic of the feminine wanting to feel the desire of the masculine. But when the feminine counterpart, the woman, if the woman is more in her feminine, yeah, she wants to feel that desire, but she's not connected to her own desire, her own pleasure. And that magnetic energy also creates desire in partner.
That's right. You as the feminine partner, your turn on sets the mood for the relationship. So many women that I work with come and they're like, I just feel like I have low libido. I'm not even that attracted to my partner anymore. I feel like he doesn't desire me. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing to amplify your own radiance? And they're like, what? And I'm
Mhm.
like, what are you doing to prioritize your turn on? And they're like, what? Your turn on is not your partner's job. Your turn on is your fucking life force. It is your job. It is your responsibility to be a turned on woman. And you being a turned on woman is what completely shifts reality in your favor. It's what, like,
Mm.
this is your power and your magnetism and your radiance is all rooted in your turn on. And so I know I'm saying this like, hi, hello, I'm saying this from experience that I went through that for years, just feeling, ugh, I don't even like, we got nothing going on here, but I was not at all connected to my turn on. And so now in my relationship and my marriage, which is so juicy, I have like, I can't even believe the marriage that we have and some of the experiences that we have and just like pinch me, like everything I ever wanted and more, right? And if I start to feel like I'm not liking what's going on, like I'll give an example, like let's say my husband comes home from work and he doesn't like come greet me right away.
Mhm.
And I don't like that. I used to be like, hold a grudge.
Yeah.
I would hold a grudge and get all walled off. And then eventually I would be like, you know, that was really shitty. I didn't like that you didn't greet me coming in, or I feel like so like you don't even care about me. Whatever. It was like I would do something like this. And now if I notice that he came in and he didn't greet me the way that I love to be greeted, I look back at myself and I'm like, was I beaming? Am I
Right,
so
right.
Am I so fucking turned on and radiant that he cannot resist me? And this is not like to make an excuse for like a partner being like an ass. That's not what this is. It's like this is polarity. This is a game. It's a dance. Like we take our relationships so seriously sometimes and we like want to make the other person wrong, but being in a relationship is not about having an extraordinary partner. It's about being an extraordinary partner. If you want an extraordinary relationship, you have to go first. And so I can't go control what he does. And me nagging him is just going to further throw it off. It's the most unsexy fucking thing ever. And so what I can do instead is I could go take a bath and like oil myself up and put on some lingerie, and I could come out later and just, run a little finger down here and give him a little like, hey, meet me in the bedroom, and guess what? That man is, not going to be able to resist. And when he comes home from work tomorrow, guess what? He's going to be all over this bitch. So it's
Right.
like taking responsibility for your turn on is going to change your whole life, not only your relationship, your marriage, but fucking everything in it because you become magnetic. You're
Hell yes. You're seducing me right now.
so
I'm getting turned on right now and I'm
glad.
loving this. And I love this reminder for everyone listening, Samantha, that yes, we can choose how we respond. And that doesn't have to impact how we view ourselves as a woman, a feminine being, a sexual being. And just like, okay, what do I need to do? It's radical responsibility. What do I need to do to get myself back into my state of magnetism by way of pleasure? And then I can come back from an empowered space and show up in the way that feels good for me. And of course, they're not going to be able to resist it in the process, but it's like who we feel we are and who we be impacts how another receives us in an
Right.
energetic level.
That's right. And the beautiful thing about that is like everything is interconnected, right? So you prioritize your radiance and your turn on. You take the power back. You have a beautiful, connected, sexy, erotic, delicious experience. But then it doesn't stop there because then also like creative ideas are flowing and your genius is online and like magical things start happening. And so, one of my clients just texted me today and she's really in her creative flow right now. And she's like, I just feel so like turned on. Like every time I create something and everywhere I go, it's like there's this like magic. Is this how you feel all the time? And I was like, as long as I'm practicing what I preach, that's what I feel. Obviously, I'm a human being and I'm also a cyclical being. So it's like, it's not that like every second is like this fucking high level magnetism, but like for the most part, yeah, I feel like this mostly all the time. I'm very committed to my work. But what I said to her was, now imagine if instead of making the creativity the source of your turn on, so that you feel turned on because you're creating, imagine you make turn on the priority. Because then your turn on is fueling your create. Like at some point you're going to be like, oh, I feel a writer's block, and then you're not going to create something, and then you're going to drop your turn on. And so there's like this over coupling that like this is the thing that's arousing right now, right? While it's arousing, right? But like what if you actually treated the arousal itself as the bottom line? How can I be turned on by life? How can I be aroused every minute of the day? It's not just like something for the bedroom. It's not something that's sexual. It's something that is life. Like this is your life force. Your radiance as a feminine being is medicine for this planet. It is the light.
Yes.
It's
I'm loving this so much because this is also even mirroring for me. Yeah. And I'll candidly say, like, these past 2 months have been so crunchy for me. Yeah, I'm in transition. I had moved. I'm doing some shifts, expansions in my business. And so uh, I haven't been connected to my pleasure in the way that I desire. And it's such a good reminder. It's really landing for me in my body of that power of pleasure because to what you're saying, like I love stories because it also takes me back in my own body from like, wow, when I was really committed and practicing daily and taking pleasure in everything. You're right. Everything was unfolding. I met a mentor of mine, Emily Fletcher, on the street of Brooklyn, New York. I was seeing like random synchronicities from the universe. Like it opens up your mind to so much more creativity, amazing relationships in life coming, love coming. You feel so connected. You feel no lack. Like I didn't feel, I was just in utter joy. And it's a time in my life I romanticize so much. And it's such a good reminder to really work with people that encourage that, be in spaces that encourage that, that teach you new tools around pleasure, and like really, really prioritizing this in our lives and investing in it, time, energy, money, all the things.
Yes, yes. And the beautiful thing about it is like you romanticize that time and then also you're like in that time anytime you choose. Right? It's like right now you're like, oh, this is the reminder. And this is the beautiful thing about what we do as women. You know, I love Mama Gina's book, Pussy Reclamation, because she talks about that like our, you know, it's like our work is to just get turned on and then remind another woman. You know, it's like then she's turned on and it's like dominoes, you know? And that's what we do. And that's why I feel like so much of our work, like in the coaching industry and just in, you know, these kinds of um, communities that we're a part of is like we're just expanding each other by reminding each other what's already there. You know, we like see
Yeah.
another woman's turn on in her power, and it's not like it's hers and it's not mine. It's like, oh, that's right. That's in me too. You know, it's like that's what we're
Mm.
doing here. That's what this is all about. Is like it's a remembrance game. It's a reclamation game. It's like liberating what's already there. And it's so powerful. We need each other. You know, it's true. Like together we rise and there is no scarcity and there is no competition. It's like this is all a dance of walking each other home. You know, like
Yes. And I love that you speak to the remembrance and the reclamation, because what comes from me, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. I know you're right, going to resonate. It's
yeah.
also reminding us as feminine beings because of the history of the feminine. We don't need to go into all of that, but there's reasons that maybe we might close from our sexual energy. We might not feel fully safe to express our pleasure. Even like what you said, I'm going to take a flower maybe and I'm going to just sniff it because it smells good. I'm going to bask in that pleasure and pause and be witnessed. And I don't have to always have my guard up, my walls up. And so I love this idea of it's a reclamation, because every woman that's in her pleasure is reminding another woman to see the power of that. And it's also empowering another woman to really step into that pleasure without fear or shame. And this is how we change the world, because the masculine wants the feminine. They desire the feminine to be in that space, not from a pitting agendas against each other, but from a woman who's deeply turned on and overflowing in love and joy.
Yes, this to me is like the balancing act that humanity is really in need of. Like this movement of feminine reclamation is so powerful because it's not just for women, it's for all beings across the spectrum of gender. It's for the planet, it's for fucking nature. Because re regardless of gender, the feminine is like innately compassionate, expansive, generous, caring, you know, and it's like we see just the extractionary culture that the overculture that we're a part of as human beings on this earth and the damage that it does to the mother, like the ultimate
Yeah.
feminine being, the planet that we live on. And so for women, you know, for feminine beings, like reconnecting to the power of pleasure and desire. The thing that it's funny because there's a lot of shame, you're right. There's a lot of shame around pleasure and desire for a reason because it was a tool of the patriarchy for the purpose of control. And we're talking like hundreds of thousands of years ago when these seeds were first planted. And there's so much we can get into about that that I'm not even going to. But it lives in us now, you know, the shame and the guilt and the sinfulness, you know, all of like the anti-sacred, anti-holy, whatever of female sexuality, but you have to ask like why? Like who's benefiting from that? That was a ploy for control and power. Why? Because female pleasure and sexuality and desire is so fucking powerful because when you think about female desire, like let's sit with, you know, for me, my business this last year has really exploded because I found a really great mentor. We're both in her mastermind, Shoshana Raven, and just a community of women who are normalizing extraordinary, which is one of the pleasure codes, right? So that we can calibrate to this feeling of more and that it's okay to want and have more, right? And so for me, when I started to, well, I used to think about the desire for more money and I felt shame and guilt around it. But then at some point, I was like, who decided that this is shameful and that there's should be any guilt in this? Like, where did this come from? Because when I think about the desire for more, it's so that I can give more. If I have, the more I have, the more I can give. The more I have, the more lives I'm impacting, the more lives I'm changing through my work. It's like, wait a minute, the feminine desire for more is often inextricably linked with the desire for collective thriving and well-being, of taking care of each other, of sharing resources. And so, it's like we have to really look at like what happens with feminine energetics when it comes into business and wealth and relationships and all these things. It creates like it waters. Right? It's like the waters come in to nourish, right?
Yeah.
So for any woman who's listening to this and like feels any of that kind of like shame or hesitation around pleasure and desire and money, all these taboos, right?
Mhm.
Be with that and like look a little deeper, because the reclamation of these things now is healing work for our lineage. It's like we do this for our ancestors that weren't able to, and we do this to shift the paradigm of the planet.
Yes, I love this so much, and this is the core of my work is bridging of the humanity and the genders, and we don't even need to like. It's not even about the shame and what It's like it's just about now how do we shift like this through this pleasure, through this joy, through this overflow, and such a good reminder for everyone to really come into their pleasure because this is how we change the frequency of the planet. Because everyone wants this. The masculine deeply desires this, and they might not fully realize the power of the pleasure, the power of a woman and her feminine vibrancy, and how do we shift it from that place. And it's just so beautiful because it's like the deeper meanings behind the work. um,
And I think for both you and I, like such when you really get to the heart of what we do, it's like, how do we be instruments of love on this planet? Right? How do we be the force of love that we're here to be, which counters the fear that we see creating all kinds of crazy shit in this realm, in this dimension that we live in. Like this is the balancing act. And so all of the work that we do is really about how do we take the love that we are at our essence, right? The essence of who we are. And then how do we actually put that into practice, put that into work so that it translates, because intention alone is not enough. Especially when we think about relationships, it's like I could have the intention, I could think to myself that I love my partner, but if it's not followed up by action, and if I'm not doing the self work to make sure that that action actually lands with them, then it's not impactful. And sometimes it's
Mhm.
impactful and it's impactful, but it's not necessarily impactful in the way I want it to be. Right.
Yeah.
So being somebody who is like aligned with the mission of like you're making your life a ministry of love in
Mhm.
some way, shape, or form, right? The energy we bring out can be an asset, a blessing to every encounter that I am in. That requires serious self-examination.
Yeah.
And this work, this pleasure work and this desire work and growing yourself in this way is how we do that. It's how we respond to the calling.
I love that so much. And this is it. Because you're really like, we all have, not everyone's the same, but I feel so much resonance with you. Even though we have different modalities, it's the bridge that's the same. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, how do I master my communication so I come from a place of love, so I'm balanced, so I'm grounded, so I receive you and I see you, and we bridge connection instead of create disconnection. And you, it's also like, how do I come back to my pleasure so that I can be my highest frequency of love that invites connection in, that magnetizes. But it's not even just about me, it's about the world. It's about you, partner. It's a frequency, it's energetics. This is so incredible, Samantha. Tell me, I always love to ask people this question. What does divine union mean to you? When you think about inner union with self, sacred union in relationship, and oneness with the cosmos and all that is, how does pleasure work tie in to this topic of divine union?
I feel like pleasure is the sensation of divine union in the body. Pleasure is the sensation of divine union in the body. And so it's like, if we're these multifaceted beings, mind, body, soul, and the body is the soul's chance to be here. It's like divine union is a concept to me that is very cosmic. It's like about the soul. It's like the essence and the depth of that divine union, whether it's with a partner or with God. It's with a partner and God. It's like a triad, right? That kind of, to me, that's like what it feels like, divine union, when it's like two become one and God is right there in the center. It's just like this divine union. But like the feeling of that in the body as a human being, as a soul in a body, is pleasure.
Oh, yes. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to, mic drop. We're done. Oh,
Oh,
so
I love
beautifully said, Samantha.
that. Thank you. Thank
How
you.
can everyone who's like, yes, I'm feeling this frequency. I want to dig into pleasure. I want to learn more. Tell me more. Where can they find out more about you and this amazing work that you're doing?
Yeah. I would love to connect with you. First of all, if you love this episode, please share the Divine Union podcast and tag both of us. I'm on
Yes.
Instagram at the.samanthajo. The.samanthajo. It's a new one for me. I just shifted into that. So you can find me there. Send me a DM. Let's connect. Let's chat. I have a incredible, the Temple Mastermind is a 6-month expansion container for rebellious, wild, iconic women who are ready to live more deeply from their pleasure, their soul, to impact every aspect of life through the pleasure codes. So that's one really beautiful space that you can learn from me. I do some one-to-one coaching. I have some classes and courses. I have a free book club coming up with some coaching that's going to be fun, and a lot more that's rolling out. So find me on Instagram and let's get connected.
Oh, yes. And I'll put all this in the show notes too. And yes, I will echo that. Let us know in the comments. Let us know in the reviews what landed for you, what was interesting. Of course, Samantha's information will be in the show notes too. So shoot her a DM, shoot me a DM. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and Nicola, I just want to say thank you so much. And I love your work so freaking much. And I'm so grateful to be here. You're like, I'm getting turned on. I was like, I remember that's how I felt when I have a podcast too, and we did a conversation, and so it just feels like such a gift to be here in your presence. You are a wealth of wisdom, and anybody who is in your world is just going to benefit like a million folds with what you.
Oh, thank you, Samantha. It's such an absolute pleasure to have you in my life, someone I admire so much and I value so much. Such amazing, amazing, incredible work, really getting to the root of everything so that we can fully thrive in life and be connected to all that is. And so, oh, I love it. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you, beautiful people, for tuning in. And until next week, may all your unions be divine.